So yes, I'm Lucas Raynal. I'm doing a postdoc at the ENCC with Pierre Rama. And so today we'll talk about the novel correlates of early analogical verb extensions. And so this is work I've completed with Pierre Rama, Louise Goyet, Evelyne Clément, and Emmanuel Sander. So I will present the first study that is fully completed, and another one that we're currently leading at the Baby Lab. And so I will not be able to show you results, but just the experimental setting. So what is analogy? Analogy is the ability to interpret new situations in the light of more familiar concepts. So for instance, the heart can be interpreted through the concept of a pump. And so it is, can you hear me like this? Yeah. Okay, yes, sorry. And so it is conventionally acknowledged that analogies involve mapping common abstract relations, so in this case, propelling a fluid, between situations involving different objects, so air in one situation and blood in the other one. And so the very general question that we address in our studies is whether young children are analogical reasoners or not. To answer this question, we were interested in unconventional verb extensions. More precisely, many studies have shown that young children, like preschoolers, frequently produce semantic approximations where they interchange verbs sharing an abstract relations. So we will call these verbs approximate verbs. So these are examples. So young children said the book is broken instead of is torn. He's healing the truck instead of repairing the truck. I undress the orange instead of I peel the orange. And so these kinds of semantic approximations have been documented in spontaneous speech, but also in naming tasks and categorization tasks. And so they suggest strong analogical abilities in young children, and more specifically the ability to extract an abstract concept from multiple examples and to generalize this concept by analogy to a non-conventional reference. However, studies have also, some authors have suggested that unconventional verb extension would be rather mainly based on objects rather than abstract relations, so that young children would preferentially interchange superficially related verbs. And so I will not go into the details of this study to spare a bit of time, but here is just a fictive example. So the authors would defend that children would tend to replace peel in I peel the orange by press. So I press the orange just because the two verbs apply to the same type of objects, so superficial similarities. So this would suggest more limited early analogical abilities, and so in our study we want to determine what is the main basis of unconventional verb extension, so objects or abstract relations. And to answer this question, we ask the question of which type of unconventional verb extension is more easily processed by preschoolers. So just like Monica, we use the ERP techniques, even related potentials, which consist in averaging EEG signal time locked to an event, for instance, a type of word. And we were more particularly interested in the N400, which indexes semantic integration, for instance, in the context of analogies. Specifically, studies have shown a graded N400 effect for literal sentences. So the N400 was minimal for literal sentences, like the clouds have moved over the city. Intermediate for metaphors, the clouds have danced over the cities, and maximal for anomalous statements, such as the clouds have read over the city. So this graded N400 effect was interpreted as reflecting an increasing difficulty in mapping to concepts. So here are our hypotheses. So based on the literature on analogy and semantic approximation, we derived the relational focus hypothesis, which is that children would more easily map verbs sharing an abstract relation than those sharing just the objects to which they apply. And so regarding the N400, we predicted a graded N400 that will be minimal for conventional verbs, slightly increasing for approximate verbs, greater for superficially related verbs, and maximal for anomalous verbs. The alternative object focus hypothesis predicts that the mapping is easier for verbs sharing objects, and so the graded N400 starting lowest for conventional verbs, slightly greater for superficially related verbs, greater for approximate verbs, and maximal for anomalous verbs. So here is the experimental design that we used. We presented a picture of actions, for instance, someone peeling an orange. And then we introduced on the auditory modality a sentence containing either a correct or conventional word, verb. She's peeling the orange, an approximate verb, she's undressing the orange, a superficially related verb, she's pressing the orange, or an anomalous verb, a pseudo-verb here, she's strunting the orange. So we used the parental questionnaire to control the familiarity of the verbs. And so the final sample in our study was consisted in 35 4-year-olds. And so you can also have a glance at the experimental setting in the EEG box. So for the results, we analyzed 9 clusters covering the main brain areas and in different time windows. But here, to spare a bit of time, I will just present the results in the posterior sites, because this is where we expect the effects. And the results on the typical N400 time window from 300 to 500 milliseconds. So just visually, we can see that the graded N400 effects indeed seems to be present. The N400 was smallest for conventional verbs, slightly greater for approximate verbs, greater for superficially related verbs, and maximal for pseudo-verbs. And the statistical analysis on the N400 time window confirmed this observation. Because, yes, we saw a main effect of verb type and a significant linear trend with the N400 that was minimal, that was increasing from conventional to approximate to superficially related verbs to pseudo-verbs. So these results support our relational focus hypothesis and suggest that preschoolers extract abstract concepts from multiple examples and extend them by analogy. And there's the question of the factors that could modulate the ease of processing semantic approximations, and we are going to address this. We are currently addressing these questions in our ongoing study, so a study for which we are currently running the experiments. So first, previous studies have shown that comparing semantically different exemplars is more efficient than comparing semantically very similar exemplars in promoting a relational extension, analogical extensions. So one possibility would be that verbs that are semantically with a high semantic diversity would be so like open, for instance, that can be applied to semantically very different exemplars, like we can open the eyes, open an envelope, or open a door, would be more easily extended by children to unconventional reference than a verb with low semantic diversity, such as undress, that typically apply to the same type of exemplar, so person with clothes. The second factor that we investigated was the level of lexical knowledge. The previous studies have shown that semantic approximation appear only after a period of conventional use of the target words, which suggests that the semantic approximation, producing semantic approximations necessitates to realize abstract semantic similarities between words. And so it is possible that children with higher vocabulary skills would more easily integrate the meaning of semantic approximations than children with lower vocabulary skills. So our hypothesis concerning the N400 are a graded N400 starting low with conventional, slightly increasing for approximate verbs with high semantic diversity, greater for approximate verbs with low semantic diversity, and maximal for anomalous verbs. And for the vocabulary skills, so we predicted, as I already said, reduced N400 for approximate verbs in the high vocabulary group compared to the low vocabulary group. So we selected 40 verbs that were semantically with a high semantic diversity and 40 verbs with a low semantic diversity, and we used the control questionnaire to to confirm that we indeed selected verbs with high or low semantic diversity. And so we proposed this questionnaire to adult participants, and we asked them to assess the conventional use of French verbs. So we asked them, qu'est-ce que l'on peut ouvrir? What can we open? And they had to select among several semantic categories. And the results showed that indeed the verbs with high semantic diversity, for the verbs with high semantic diversity, the participants tended to select significantly more semantic categories than for verbs with low semantic diversity. So this was just to check our material, and so we used a similar design as in our previous study. We were presenting with slight modifications, so we were presenting a picture of action and then a sentence containing a conventional verb. She's breaking the plate, an approximate verb with a high semantic diversity. She's breaking the paper. An approximative verb with low semantic diversity, she's peeling the wall, and an incongruent verb, she's peeling the ball. So as you can see, we didn't use the same pictures for the different verb condition. We were not able to do that, but we used the same verbs in the two approximate verb condition and in the conventional verb condition and the incongruent verb condition. So half of the conventional verbs were taken from the SD plus verbs, and half of them were taken from the SD minus verbs, and the same was done for incongruent verbs. So to assess the vocabulary skills of the preschoolers, we used the DLPF questionnaire that assesses the production of words of different word classes, like nouns, verbs, and adjectives. Through parental reports, obviously. And so we are currently testing with 4-year-old monolingual children, and so yes, the experimental testing is still in progress at the Baby Lab. So yeah, now I will just conclude. So we provided, with our first study, neurophysiological evidence that converge with the behavioral data on semantic approximation that suggests strong early analogical abilities. And that suggests that analogy has a central role in lexical development, since children will learn how to use words by applying them to, by analogy to new reference. Our result also suggests that the cognitive roots of metaphorical understanding are present from an early age. And so as regard to our perspective, the perspective we're actually currently investigating, we want to know if the semantic diversity of the verbs plays a role, which would allow us to assess the effects of the type of comparisons on verb learning. And we also want to assess the influence of lexical knowledge, which would support the idea that overextensions are not just errors, but actually result from a learning process. And so thank you very much for your attention.